The story from Wide_Trip 8392. No assistant for me? Let's see how that works out. This happened almost 15 years ago when I was still living in my home country. I worked in a warehouse that served as a distribution centre for a supermarket chain. A very famous one, by the way. I was an inspector in the shipping department. Basically, the sorting section would bring to the docks the goods that the store had requested, and we would prepare and load the shipment onto the truck. In the shipping department, there were assistants who did the manual work, assembling the loads on pallets, wrapping them with stretch film, and loading them onto the truck, while the inspector checked whether everything being sent to the store was correctly labelled and secure for transport. Additionally, the inspector entered all data in the internal system, sealed the truck, and printed the load summary for the administrative department to generate an invoice. Of course, inspectors also helped the assistants with the heavy lifting. Most of the time, this didn't interfere with our main responsibilities and actually sped up the process, especially since our shift, the afternoon shift, had an issue with trucks arriving late. Many times, we wouldn't finish everything on time, leading to overtime and sometimes having to leave the remaining work for the night shift, which wasn't ideal since each shift had its own list of stores to attend to, and this delay affected them. Each inspector worked with at least one assistant, but sometimes more, depending on their workload. Some inspectors had more stores to handle that day, some stores required extra loads, or other situations that called for additional help. We had a supervisor who had been with the company for many years and had worked in the department before being promoted. The job was great, and everything ran smoothly, until a crisis hit another department, leaving it without a supervisor. Management decided they needed someone experienced to lead that department, so they transferred our supervisor there. In his place, they promoted someone from another department who had no leadership experience. Our department was running well with no need for drastic changes, but our new supervisor didn't see it that way. One day, I arrived at work, and as usual at the beginning of the shift, the supervisor printed out a sheet listing the stores to be handled that day, along with which inspector was assigned to each one. So far, so good. He made some changes, but nothing too concerning. However, before we started working, he called the entire department for a quick meeting. In this meeting, he announced that he had reassigned which assistants would work with which inspectors and showed us a printed list. To my surprise, there was no name next to mine. In other words, I was expected to work without an assistant. I protested immediately. I don't remember the exact details of the discussion, as it happened a long time ago, but basically, his idea was that as other assistants finished helping their assigned inspectors, whoever was available would come help me, something that already happened naturally as we had a strong sense of camaraderie in our department. Plus, no one wanted to be seen by the bosses standing around doing nothing. But it wasn't enough. It would overburden me. I tried to argue my case, but I couldn't convince him. Other inspectors were also left without assistance, but they were relatively new to the company and didn't say anything, probably out of fear of losing their jobs or something similar. Well, since I couldn't change his mind, I accepted that I would be working without an assistant. I took the signs for the stores I was responsible for, found available docks for them, placed the signs on the dock gates, noted on the printed sheet which stores were at which docks, then went to the dock of the first store I would handle. I leaned against the wall, crossed my arms, and waited. Goods started arriving, but I didn't touch a single box. The dock filled up, and I didn't move an inch. After a few hours, the supervisor walked through the department to check on things, saw the state of my dock, and asked why the load wasn't being prepared. I simply said, "I don't have any assistants. How am I supposed to prepare the load?" and remained standing with my arms crossed. Eventually, some assistants came to help me, and when they did, I helped them with the heavy lifting. But soon, the inspectors they were originally assigned to needed more help, and of course, they left my load behind. By the end of the shift, one load was ready to be loaded onto the truck, but another was only halfway done. I placed the paperwork with the load details in a visible spot for whoever would finish it and left. As I was leaving, my supervisor asked about the loads. Without turning around, I told him where the papers were. He asked if I wasn't going to finish them, and I didn't even respond. The next day, he called me in for a meeting. When I arrived, the manager was also there. They asked me what had happened the previous day. I replied, "Nothing that I remember." They brought up the incomplete loads. I explained that my shift had ended, and I couldn't stay for overtime, so I left the information for whoever would finish the job, and I even told the supervisor where the papers were. Then I took out my wallet, pulled out my time card receipt, and showed them that I had clocked out at the designated time. They mentioned that I had spent most of the shift standing with my arms crossed. I responded that I had done my job, which, as stated in my contract, consisted solely of verifying the load, supervising assembly and loading, entering data into the system, sealing the truck, and printing the load summary. Nothing beyond that. I continued by saying that anything else I might do during my shift was purely out of goodwill to help the assistants and speed up the work. But on the previous day, I had chosen to exercise my right not to perform those extra tasks because I felt unfairly treated by my supervisor, who had not assigned me a dedicated assistant. That would have significantly overburdened me with tasks I wasn't paid to do. The manager simply looked at the supervisor and said, "He needs to have an assistant." Then he turned to me and asked me to leave. The two of them stayed there for quite a while. That same day, I was assigned an assistant, and we never spoke of it again. Nothing like that ever happened again. The new supervisor's stint lasted only a few months before he returned to his previous role. He had put too much trust in employees he was friends with, but who weren't very competent at their jobs, and that was his downfall. Our old supervisor came back to his position, and everything improved again. The malicious compliance was flawless. By strictly adhering to job duties, the inefficiency of the new supervisor's decision became obvious. Management quickly realized the mistake, corrected it, and the ineffective supervisor was eventually removed. A perfect example of letting bad leadership fail itself. The next story from Ikusa. DMV customer wants employee fired. In my early career as a public servant, I managed a section at the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. I had one public-facing counter and 10 other employees in the back. I always told the people at the loan window to call me if they had a difficult customer, because I didn't want them to feel intimidated being all by their lonesome in a tiny space, in a lightly trafficked area. Well, my grumpiest, most difficult employee was always rubbing people the wrong way. And we had a huge meeting where I had to tell her that her job was on the line. In the future, I needed her to be rainbows and kittens and to call me before anything went sideways. So, 2 hours later, she calls me with this saccharine tone in her voice and said she needed me to help a customer. So, I make my long way to her tucked away corner, and this customer is towering over her and screaming with spittle flying out the corners of his mouth. My employee is literally pressed up against the filing cabinets to get as far away from him as she can. Irate customer wants us to find out what the VIN was on a vehicle he owned in 1955. Then he wants to know who owns that car. So, for part 1, finding the VIN, we can do a record search on microfilm for $10 an hour plus $10 for the record. He has to provide a credit card in advance and authorization to charge up to X hours for searching. He doesn't care how long it takes, he just wants it now, and he's going to wait for it. We had about 40,000 rolls of poorly indexed microfilm, so he could be looking at an entirely unreasonable charge. Oh, and he wants to wait for it. As for who currently owns the car, we would have to find every instance of that car's registration to find the last known registration. But we never microfilmed registration until 1996, so it's unlikely that we could locate it. On top of that, we won't give out that person's information without certain criteria being met, none of which this guy satisfied. So I walk up to this angry dude, and he turns on me and starts to yell at me. I hold my hand up like I'm a traffic cop and say, "Sir, I am absolutely going to help you, but I could help you faster if we used calm, quiet voices." To my utter surprise, he stopped yelling, but he began insisting that my employee be fired right now. I explained that we have a disciplinary ladder that we follow, and I will absolutely have my employee brought up for review. Then, I sent her to my desk with instructions to bring me the blue folder in my top left drawer. Then, I explained to the customer that I would need approximately 40 hours to locate his original VIN, assuming the film hadn't been destroyed by the ravages of time and assuming it was in the drawers I expected it to be in. I also guaranteed that he'd never have to work with that employee again. He signed off on an $800 authorization for time, and I told him I'd personally call him as soon as I reached the end of the 80 hours of search time or found his records. So, he reluctantly left when I indicated that I needed to go find what was taking my employee so long to bring me my blue folder and discuss the discipline I'd promised. So, I went to find my employee sitting in my chair with my blue folder. It was full of Dove chocolates and a note I wrote to myself on my first day there. Everything will be okay. She was holding the folder and looking confused and scared. She knew she was about to get fired after that asshole customer, but I reached over, grabbed a piece of chocolate, told her to help herself, and plopped down in my guest chair. She started to apologize, and I held my hand up again. I reiterated that we had just discussed my expectations that morning. She was to call me immediately if she had any inkling that someone was going to be upset with her, which she did. She didn't engage, just called me and waited, which was exactly what she was supposed to do. I told her I had to write her up for following directions completely and document that her performance had improved immediately after our discussion, and that I recommended an early end to her performance improvement plan. So I sent a different employee to find the guy's records, which took about 25 hours. Then I called the guy to explain that we found his VIN, but that we were unable to find any other record of it after he bought it. We told him he could come down to pick up a copy of the record. The same employee he demanded to be fired was there when he came to pick up the record. She held one finger up to him to indicate that he should wait, closed her window, and called me. I personally walked down to deliver his record. He started yelling at me that I promised to fire the employee. I corrected him that I agreed to consider the disciplinary ladder and that he would never have to work with her again. Never did I promise to fire her. He left in a huff with his useless VIN from a vehicle that probably didn't even last 20 years before it got junked. And car junkies, it was some kind of MGA car which I had never heard of before that. Edit. My grammar sucks. Edit 2. TLDR. DMV customer demands employee be fired. DMV manager promises to take the appropriate disciplinary action and promises the customer will never work with particular employee again. Customer wrongfully assumes that means the employee is definitely getting fired. Instead, employee is rewarded for having to put up with DMV customer's asshattery. DMV customer never has to work employee again because manager insists on dealing with DMV customer herself, protecting her employee from continued abuse by the DMV customer. This was masterful malicious compliance. The manager upheld the customer's exact requests, but on strict DMV terms, making him pay $800 for mostly useless info. The employee remained protected and the entitled customer got nothing worthwhile. Perfection. The next story from itcoop... maternity wear. This happened several years ago. After onboarding a new job, I was told I could hire an assistant. The HR director, Kelly, handed me a stack of resumes, told me about a friend's daughter, and bumped Kat to the top of my interview list. Kat passed the tech test with high scores and interviewed. Well, so I hired her. Kat showed up to work on time, had a good attitude, performed well on assignments, and was generally a pleasant person all around. After probation, Kat was excited to tell me that her last raise was enough to get an apartment with her BF. It was a couple months after her raise, I started to notice Kelly spending an inordinate amount of time talking to Kat. The convos sounded personal, cordial, and Kelly was friends with Kat's mom. So I didn't think much about it until one day Kelly barges in my office. Did you know Kat moved into an apartment with her boyfriend? I might have heard something about that. Well, Kat is pregnant and her mom is devastated, and proceeds to fill me in on the details on Kat's personal life. Uncomfortably, I interrupt, acting like I have a lot going on. This really isn't any of my business. If there's something related to Kat's performance that we need to discuss, please fill me in, but as for me, Kat is doing a great job. A few months pass. Kat's baby bump is starting to show. Kelly is again in my office. Kat is not in compliance with the dress code. Last staff meeting, Kelly handed out a dress code policy with a collage various women's shoes and dresses and suits, presumably cut from fashion magazines, to assist us determine what was acceptable from what was not. I picked up the policy and the clip art sheets with a stare reminiscent of Jack Nicholson's "I'm of a mind to make some Mookie Batman/Joker" scene. Is she wearing something in the not allowed clippings? As I began to spread the clip art around my desk. She isn't wearing maternity clothes, as Kelly points to the bullet about maternity clothes in the policy. Well, the policy clearly says maternity wear is allowed. Kat is clearly pregnant and she is wearing clothes, so you know what I mean when I say maternity clothes. Clothes from a maternity store. I told Kelly that I would talk to Kat, which I did. Kat filled me in that there was some drama with her mum not liking her BF, that Kelly is involved, etc., etc. I just told her to read the policy and be sure she complies. And no matter what, to trust me, I had her back. The next day, Kelly is in my office telling me that Kat is again not in compliance with the dress code. At this point, Kelly knows I'm getting frustrated. Okay, I'll talk to her again. This time, I want you present because I'm going to give her a formal warning and assign remedial training. I bring Kat into my office with Kelly present and formally read off my prepared statement, making it clear that it will go into her permanent file. Kat, you were given a verbal warning yesterday to comply with this dress code. Because it is not clear to me what is or is not a violation of this policy, you are to report to the HR office 10 minutes early every morning for the next 2 weeks for dress code inspection. Report to me if HR finds your dress unfit. If you are found to be in violation of this policy and are unable to correct your dress before the start of the workday, your employment will be terminated. By the time I'm finished, Kat is tearing up and Kelly is staring at the floor, speechless. I dismiss Kat. I hope that this is the last I hear about this because if I do, I'll fire her. As Kelly, speechless, walks out of my office. I told Kat not to worry about any of this. We have them where we want them. So, for a week, Kat reported to me that her clothes were fine per HR inspection. At the beginning of the second week, she was chuckling. Kelly told me that I look very nice today. Attitudes began to change and everyone was smiling. I got called to the red carpet by Jim, the CEO. He tried to keep a straight face as he recited what he heard was going on and asked me to cut the remedial training short because it was embarrassing the HR staff. Straight-faced, I said, "Well, Jim, if I stopped the remedial training, I'd have to fire Kat. Company policy clearly states that failure to complete a formal remediation plan is immediate termination. It is very clear. There is zero tolerance. You can't fire a pregnant woman for what she wears. I'm asking, no, I'm telling you to stop. Stop following company policy?" Laughing, he concedes, "Okay, I am rescinding that ridiculous dress code policy effective immediately." The malicious compliance was flawless. By strictly enforcing HR's own rules, OP exposed HR's hypocrisy, forcing her into a corner. The CEO's reaction proved OP's strategy worked perfectly, dismantling a ridiculous policy while protecting Kat. A masterclass in turning bureaucracy against itself.